Good morning.
All right. So before anyone else comes in here, I'm just going to introduce myself and we'll just start it off. Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome to Minds Behind the Music. I am your host, LA. Uh, my co host, Mason, is just running a little bit late, so we'll wait on him for that. But I will get into today's topic. Today's topic is more about genres of music that are more related than you think. And I have plenty of different examples to show you guys, and I'm sure Mason does too. Um, and whenever he gets in here, I'll show you. He'll show you his, and I'll show you mine. But I noticed that just for starters, a lot of the a lot of genres in both like rock and roll and pop and all that other fun stuff end up being more related to each other than you would really think or would imagine. I guess it would all depend on, the type of artist you listen to um specifically where they came from, what kind of music they listened to. Um it all really it all as a matter of, what they take to account. Like the rapper Post Malone, when I see him and I like see like the things he does and like the kind of music he makes, it's very much like this guy was like a big rock listener. He was big into heavy metal music because I know he did some songs with Ozzy. He does a lot of acoustic songs. He has like a signature technique to his voice. It's like an automatic vibrato that only he and certain other people could do. But I to backtrack to, when the boomers were kind of getting mad about him and his kind of music, they I think you have to give credit where credit is due. And with um Post Malone, I will admit I'm not the biggest fan of him, but I can appreciate that he really enjoys those older like rock and heavy metal styles and that blues kind of influence. I would love to play one of his songs, one of his acoustic songs, because it has more of like a jazzy or bluesy, not jazzy, but more bluesy sound to it. And I will admit that's pretty cool. I think that nowadays we're starting to get in an influx of older influences affecting a lot of the newer artists and the newer genres. And we I don't think we ever seen this kind of phenomena. I think since I would say since the early 70s, or even before that, say the 60s, because around the 60s and 70s that was like the big progressive rock movement. I know only people that were in the know to know um were only the people that were in the know to know knew about them. And it's because when for progressive rock, it kind of mixes those rock oriented styles like blues, um rock and roll, that kind of like old 50s and 60s style, with the classical common practice period type of music. That's I would say a lot of, and even with some of the 20th century experimental types like John Cage and as far as I can name him, I've noticed that it's very prevalent in, say, King Crimson's music, or uh, Gentle Giant, that kind of stuff. Prog rock tends to kind of branch off from whatever genres they can take that aren't even like what people would think about. The point of all of this is just to talk about what relates to each other and what you wouldn't expect to relate. And for for genres like progressive rock, it mixes a lot of those like types of music that you wouldn't really listen to or wouldn't really think that to listen to, but it connects with that type of genre of music. Like I remember when I first started listening to Black Sabbath, I would not have guessed their strong like jazz influence over their styles of music. I think more prevalent when I look back to it, say the Paranoid album, there was definitely more of like a jazz style. There was a swing feel to it. If you ever listen to say Hand of Doom has that like swing jazz sound. I think during the part where it shifts from D minor to C minor, instead where it goes ding 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 ding. Like I would not have expected that to really when I first listened to it, I didn't take to account, hey, this sounds kind of like jazz. This sounds like blues oriented, which then again, a lot of music in the late 60s and early 70s was strongly blues oriented. Just having some tea. But a lot of that stuff was more related to each other. I think the influences back in the day were more obvious than say nowadays cuz I could name like an artist like Thundercat and people would I think people that are more experienced with the older styles of music, like say people that grew up in the 70s and 80s could hear and see those influences with Thundercat while he really branched off as well. Like Thundercat for example, he was in a crossover thrash band. I think he was in other punk bands. He was mostly a rock bassist. And then when he started branching off, started working with rappers, started making his own solo music, that's when he started doing more jazz and R&B related music, which to say in the 2000s, which I don't know how long people have been listening to music that Thundercat's been in, but I've only listened to the music of Thundercat since about 2018, 2019. I was really slowly starting to get into him around that time, and I didn't really get to appreciate the kind of music he did in the 2000s because I I wasn't really paying attention to that type of music at the time. I was more into I was I was more into like the adult contemporary kind of stuff from the 2000s and all the big radio hits from the 2000s, like say the Fray, All American Rejects, and even the music of Disturbed. I wasn't really diving deep into the types of music, into the other genres of music that I would have dived into or would have dove into, say, now or 3 years ago. Like this even goes for both music listeners and non-music listeners. When it comes to when it comes to just listening to music, it's you don't have to take to account what influenced these artists, but it's always a nice thing to do. I I always took that to account, and at least when I was starting to get into music and really being enthusiastic about it. Here's my co-host. Hey Mason, what's up? Oh, I cannot hear you. I think you gotta check your sound or check the mic settings. All right. I think he's figured out the problem. May or may not have figured out the problem, but before he gets back on, I think nowadays I'm starting to realize a lot of genres back then, or a lot of those like big like rock. bands from back in the old days, say the hair metal era, I wouldn't have expected them to have, say, influences from progressive rock or jazz or anything like that. Maybe blues. There's definitely a decent amount of blues and country influence in the glam metal scene, but I think more often than not, a lot of those blues guitarists look at these like glam and hair metal kind of guys, and they're like, "Oh, they don't got no blues feel to them. They ain't got none of that." And I find that to be quite contraire, especially with guitarists like Eddie Van Halen, Steve Vai, Paul Gilbert, um, even artists for that, or um, artists that came after that. They tend to have that like kind of blues style to them. I'll even pull up. You know what? I'm gonna even pull up a video of Paul Gilbert talking about his playing, because whenever Mason gets back, I could even have him vouch for me on that. But while we do that, just bear with me, fellas. I'm going to a Paul Gilbert video. Oh, that's right here. Just gonna get that ready. Share screen. I remember even talking with Mason about this a couple years ago. I think this is when I first joined Progress Avenue. We were talking about we were talking about the um just shred players and blues players, and I know Mason is a huge blues guitarist, as that's been the number one meme of my co-host is blues. But um oh, speak of the devil. Oh, now I can hear you.
Perfect. All right. I figured out the problem.
Yeah, I was.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good, man. I was just about to play this Paul Gilbert video, but before we do, I was talking about how uh, when I first joined Progress Avenue, when you first when I got to know you, you were definitely more of like a blues and like classic rock uh, style player, and I
Yeah.
I was I don't know if Paul Gilbert or any way, shape, or form kind of opened you up to that, like the whole like shred guitarist. But here's the video. I know we both watched this, but I want to show some people. It's kind of like
Okay.
it didn't even like me when I watched it.
When
You can
I
hear
was
that,
doing a
okay,
lot of
right?
shredding, of course, I was listening to Ingve, and also I was listening to a lot of classical music. So, like, when you listen to keyboards, there's sort of that sort of thing. And there's some beautiful harpsichord and piano music from Bach and Mozart, and I really like that. But I play guitar, and I think it really miss, you know, being able to make a note, to give it vibrato or that to me just has so much meaning, and it's something
Could
that
he
the guitar can do, and
could he actually be using the same pick that I have here? I, just, I know this is like
Was that
weird
it?
and out of the subject. This is the Tortex point
Right.
73.
I can't.
I'm
Where did his pick go?
it's like in between his fingers, I think. Let me
Oh, I see it.
see
I
if I
see a little yellow
keyboard
blob.
and the harpsichord can't do that.
yeah, you see it in between his
So
fingers.
in the
Yeah.
blues style, there's that style, and also just the melodies. I, I love in the blues. There's a lot more to me. There's a lot more freedom for melodies because you can play the minor third, you can bend it up, and you can start to get all these even jazzy, like you can get the flat nine. You can work it in so it works, and things like and and it's just the notes are more interesting. In metal, you know, when you have like your, you know, most heavy metal is based on that kind of chord progression, natural minor, you know, and you know, of course, there's great things in that style. I mean, I love Stairway to Heaven, but harmonically, it's kind of limiting, at least for me. I've played it for a long time. You know, just sort
I think that's this kind of relates to a lot of what we've been talking about these past couple streams, with opening up to like different genres of music. And uh this even relates to this topic, is like genres, and a lot of genres, including like, you know, the hair metal and a lot of those big scenes, tend to be more related than most people think. um
Mm.
I was gonna ask you this like what after the video, but I might as well ask you this now. When you first started, like when before you know, you and I became associated with, and we were in a band, and you know, all this other fun stuff. What would you have expected, like a lot of these shred guitarists to have like strong blues influence to their playing, or
So, um, yes and no. I would say yes, because I feel like every guitarist has at least a couple blues licks like up their sleeve. All right. That's just something. I don't know why it's only guitarists. Like no other type of instrumentalist will do that. I think
Yeah.
really.
we got more jazz licks? Well, for the bass
Yeah.
players, it's the jazz licks.
And I can see that because the whole structure in the beginning of the double bass was, or at least in modern times, was fucking walking bass lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can see why that would be a thing. So it's much in the same vein for guitarists, where I feel like pretty much everyone has a couple blues licks with them.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, I don't know, you know, they're shredding, and I can respect somebody like this who kind of like a jack of all trades, you know. I never really gave him much thought before you showed him to me anyway.
Yeah, before I showed you Paul Gilbert. And
Mm-hmm.
this might even relate more to, you know, that whole Mr. Big Billy Sheehan phase that I had when I first, actually no, this phase started before I joined you guys. That like Billy Sheehan Mr. Big phase, or the shredding phase that I would like to call it, which even before that, I guess I was kind of glad that to kind of get you more engaged, or get you engaged to this kind of guitar playing, or this kind of style, because I I'm glad to hear that if you were as enthusiastic as I was when it came to that. And because I very much respect Paul Gilbert. I think he's a very competent guitarist, and I like, from what I've seen and hear from him talking, like he really knows his stuff, not just in blues, but just as a guitarist in general.
Right. It's like, I don't know, you want to aspire to be a better musician. It's like, I mean, this could be said for any instrument, but I feel like it's particularly challenging with guitar. Of course, I'd be biased. Part of the reason I feel being that every other instrument, you learn how to read music. Guitarists don't do that. And by extension,
Except classical
bass
guitars.
players to an extent. Yeah, like a classical guitarist, but with classical guitar, you're limited to classical, you know, with especially trying to sight read or otherwise read metal pieces or rock pieces, or learn how to read solos complete from notation. It's like there's a whole field of learning, and not structured, but kind of like a clear path, like with a pianist, learn how to read music. And then from there you develop your chops and other things, but you still have that foundation, right? It's very organized. With guitarists, it's nothing like that. So you kind of got to like work double time if you really want to be shining on the guitar. I don't know. So when I see somebody like this talking the way that he does, it's enlightening, really, because a lot of people will just play that limiting metal riff, or even though he's vouching for the blues, blues can be very limited in and of itself.
Yeah. Before I expand on anything else, I probably just I'll continue with the video, and if I have anything else to say in between that, I'll pause.
Sounds good.
Sort of run out of ideas like this. I can't change those notes. There's no other options. And with blues, there's so many. I can go. It's just there's a lot more. I can say a lot more. Blues has more words to me. It's funny because people sometimes heavy metal people think, oh, blues is so simple. To me, it's much more sophisticated. It really is connected to jazz.
I think blues is one of the most I think it's the one genre that's most closely connected to jazz, because when you look at all these other genres, like I said, that are like very sophisticated or very like diverse, as what some people would say, a lot of it comes from the blues, which some people, I know a lot of music listeners and a lot of like music enthusiasts and musicians themselves will say like almost every single genre that's out now was blues influence, blues or at least jazz or both. And I think that he brings up a good point with that, with the blues being connected to jazz and it being more sophisticated than just straight heavy metal or traditional heavy metal, or whichever you'd want to describe it as.
Right. I mean, it's blues stems directly from jazz. I mean, that's and I find it funny because jazz is or blues is just an alteration of what jazz really is. Jazz is 2/5/1, blues is 1/4/5. It's like, although I get there's like farther roots than that, with blues stemming back way before even jazz was like big time, so to speak. But I mean, come on, you'd be hard pressed to find a 1/4/5 chord structure that doesn't have some influence or sway over even music today. I mean, it's just so standard and bluish,
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah. I'm gonna continue.
And even if you do play a simple blues, the bending and the pitches, there's so much of an art of like how much you bend. How much do you go up? There's an art to that. I love that art. And now maybe the main thing is just the art of improvising. And actually, playing the blues really helps my metal improvising. If I improvise on a metal song, it's so much more melodic now, because it's really trained my ears to listen to the intervals. I know when I'm playing the root. I know when I'm playing the minor third. I know when I'm playing the major sixth or the ninth. I'm much more familiar with the intervals and what they sound like, and I can sing them better. Where with metal, I was just sort of taking the scale and going up and down, and it's sort of just, no, and of course you can do patterns, and you can play melodically too, but really that comes from my blues playing. So whatever style you play, I think blues will help make it better.
What do you think of those like last things that he said? Like, that last sentence in particular.
Uh, oh boy. See, all right. Personally, coming from like strictly blues and melodic and the color of each note,
Mhm.
and now stepping my foot into the, you know, it's blues definitely. There's a melodic structure to it that can be limiting. Any guitarist, any blues guitarist will tell you 100% that uh, the art is in the finger vibrato. It's nothing else. You know, the intervals, the feeling, sure. Finger vibrato. If you don't have it, you're not a blues guitarist. If you don't have that art of that bend in the vibrato, no. I think it's particularly interesting because I'm looking at it from the complete opposite side, where I stepped my foot in blues and melody for years. And now that I'm trying to do that whole, shred, oh, look at how fast I can play, blah, blah, blah. It's almost kind of hard to like turn off that melody maker inside my head.
Mhm.
I can't really say which one's better. And I'm definitely not one of those people who are going to look at Steve Vai and go, but he can't play with any feel. Like, no.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I think
go
I
ahead,
think
go
it's
ahead.
important to learn both genres. One is flashy and the other is feely, and you can combine them, and it's beautiful.
90% of the times they are combined and they end up being combined. Like the top glam metal and hair metal guitarists, the ones that like really shred and like, are the real show offy kind of guitarists, end up being the ones that know the blues and know jazz and know a lot of other different techniques, which kind of, makes me give them a lot of credit for being able to do these things, because you could be Kerry King from Slayer and just do the like all the random notes uh on the guitar and just do a wah pedal kind of solo, and that could and anybody I and you could and that'll be it. Like there's no real like structure to the notation, or you could actually think about the structure, what kind of scale degrees and what kind of like just what kind of playing you take to consideration, because I think a lot of the times a lot of the big four like thrash metal bands or thrash metal guitarists tend to create that stigma that you can pretty much go nuts on the guitar without really knowing what you're doing, um, and then end up playing solo playing a solo, or that be classified as a shreddy solo. And a lot of people think that guitarists that shred end up doing that, and it's not actually. And 90% of the time, it's not actually true. Um, Even within the big four thrash metal, within the realm of the big four, like say Megadeth, for example. Uh, Megadeth is known for being that really fast-paced metal guitar shreddy, uh, overwhelmingly fast and aggressive music. But when you really take to consideration how they play, it's very very unique. Like Marty Friedman, he was Megadeth's guitarist from 1988 until 1996 or 1998. I don't remember. It was it, or two no 2002. He left Megadeth in 2002, I believe. Let me see if I can find the Paul Gilbert, because we're really more so, at least the idea that I want to bring up with today's topic, or what I was bringing up, is the how a lot of other genres really relate more uh to certain genres that we listen to, like say Black Sabbath. I remember when I first joined Progress Avenue, I wouldn't have guessed. I wasn't even thinking about the jazz influence that Black Sabbath had on
Mm.
their music. Like, the album Paranoid, the song Hand of Doom.
Mm.
I was mentioning that before, that part that's in C when it goes from D to C. That
Yeah.
it's like a swing shuffle kind of
Oh, yeah.
flow to it, and it's very jazzy, and I wasn't even thinking about that until now, and I'm like, I knew that Black Sabbath was a blues oriented band. I just never saw them as like a jazz kind of. I never saw them as jazzy either. And like, I could tell even from like Geezer Butler's playing. He's very bluesy because he was originally a guitarist. Um, he was also like, again, like his lines with the guitar end up being very jazzy. Oh, we got one viewer in there. Let's get those likes up, guys. But what do you see any other types of genres that like affected Black Sabbath? Like, could you say that there was maybe like prog rock? Could you say there was classical influence in Black Sabbath?
Classical, probably not. Um, ooh, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. I heard a story the other day. The Black Sabbath off of Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
That song, that tritone, actually, Geezer Butler got that from Holst's The Planets, more specifically Mars, Thy Bringer of War, where they do that whole tritone thing in the very beginning, and it's like a march.
Yeah.
And I honestly, for the life of me, can't say that Black Sabbath had any like direct classical influence, but I will give them that. I mean, that song in particular was influenced by a classical-ish piece, because I think that came out in 1918. So it's not really like classical, but classical, okay. And I wouldn't say prog rock. I mean, I would say blues and jazz, really. And I mean, even taking into account that the chord structures in which Tony Iommi was using, I mean, it's all power chords, root and fifth, and that was really, really it. But especially learning a lot of his solos, you can tell right away, oh, this is not metal phrasing. This is not do 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 do. This is like do 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 do. Very jazz and blues phrasing, and especially Bill Ward. Holy crap! I mean, that guy was a jazz drummer. He was a jazz drummer. So it's like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's funny to say that the beginning or starter or original metal band in the world was really just a hard jazz band. So,
like I said, this relates to genres influencing each other, because that's literally all music is. It's just one genre influencing another. And I think that, I don't know if a lot of people have taken into consideration that Black Sabbath has a strong jazz influence. I'm not saying that there probably aren't a lot of people out there that have. There probably are a lot of people that think that have taken into consideration Black Sabbath's jazz influence. But in recent years, I could say I haven't. And now that I'm really paying more attention to them, which and this doesn't have to affect my enjoyment with them. I enjoy them either way. Like, I enjoy them even more knowing that all these influences, because like you said, Bill Ward, like a lot of his fills, say like in War Pigs or in Iron Man, a lot of his fills were very jazz oriented, like say Buddy Rich or
Mm.
Gene Krupa. They're known for their really like extravagant kind of fills, and a lot of those like big like drum styles end up being in rock music. I forgot what the name of that show is. It was with uh Jason Siegel. Jason Siegel, that was his name. It was a show in the 90s, I would like to say, either the 90s or early 2000s. And I remember there's a scene where he was listening to Rush and his dad was saying like, "Oh, Neil Peart isn't that good of a drummer." And he's like, "I'm going to show you some real drummers." And then he puts on a jazz record and he sees like like Jason Siegel's character hears the jazz musicians, like the jazz drummers and going off on the record, and it's like, wow, these guys are amazing. And believe it or not, a lot of the craziness you hear in say modern like hard rock and heavy metal, like say like Led Zeppelin, even Iron Maiden. You could go so far to say that Iron Maiden has a strong jazz influence with their drummers, or with their drummer, specifically Nico McBrain.
Mm.
He the way that he hits the ride. I know if Boogie were here, he'd be able to tell you this. He would have a better way of explaining this, but he has more of a ride, like he has more of a rhythm with the ride.
Mm.
Um,
I would have to argue that, speaking of influences, all the guys today are influenced by the guys, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Okay. They all want to, probably anybody who follows them, closely, like, okay, one of my favorite guitarists is Robin Trower. Well, how did Robin Trower get to be Robin Trower? He liked blues. He listened to a lot of old blues guitarists and jazz. So when you take that into account, well, should I only be taking lessons from Robin Trower? Maybe I should step back a little farther too. You know what I mean? It's like, or even like, I find it that perhaps when you're trying to step inside the world of how guys played long ago, maybe you should step even longer ago. You know what I mean? Like there's always farther that you can go back to see how that line of influence had progressed, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, or even like Sabbath, like they were influenced by a lot of jazz guys. Well, I'll listen to Sabbath and then I'll also go listen to the jazz guys that they were influenced by. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
And even now, it's like, I feel like personally, I figured that out early. I feel like, where I feel like, oh, okay, I know, right? Like I knew that these guys that I like listen to this type of music. I'm gonna go listen to that. I'm gonna go even further back and take note, But I don't know how many people that I've met, at least, have really done that. You know what I mean? Not putting myself up on a pedestal, and there are obviously exceptions. You and Nick, obviously, but I don't know how many people that I know of that go, oh, well, there's a broader spectrum here that I could be discovering, and really take away from. Like, I don't know, like, same thing happened with metal to blues, or blues to metal rather. The blues scene, oh well, now I'll pick up a guitar, but now I want to play fast, and then you kind of lose some of that essence of what made those guys great, and it so on and so forth.
Yeah. I think that's why I always encourage people to expand their horizons. like, yeah, it's great to listen to a lot of these artists, but you also have to know about who they are, especially like the genres that influence them, like Steve Harris or the rest of Iron Maiden, which I mentioned before. Iron Maiden, they're 90% of them aren't even really heavy metal influenced. Like Steve Harris, I know wasn't like a huge heavy metal fan. There was a couple exceptions like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. You consider
Mm.
that, but he was particularly a progressive rock fan. Like I know he enjoyed Yes, he enjoyed Rush, which if you have listened to Yes or Rush, they don't sound anything like Iron Maiden. Like their sound is completely different, and
Mm.
but it's a their kind of music shaped not only their band sound but other band sounds, and that could be said with the jazz and blues artists, like like I said, Iron Maiden was a big, like, Rush was a huge part of Iron Maiden's like music, at least when it came to playing, because there's Neil Peart and then there's Geddy Lee, and there's even Alex Lifeson with the way that he handled the chord phrasings.
Mm.
And there it's not exactly like if if you'd listen to Iron Maiden, you wouldn't think, oh, this sounds like Rush. No, but they do kind of branch off of each other. And I if you ever want to if you really want to go back, um, there's the Who and Led Zeppelin. They influence Rush. Like Geddy Lee's openly said that John Entwistle and John Paul Jones are like two of his biggest influences, at least when it comes to his bass playing. And I don't think neither the Who nor Led Zeppelin sound like Rush, and they end up shaping what other bass players would sound like.
I
Like
oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly my point. I mean, it's like again going back to influences, it's like most of the time you probably never would have guessed, you know? Um
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's kind of funny how it happens in that way, you know? But despite that, you got to broaden your horizons. And I mean, especially with me, it was hard to do that. Like at first, like I realized what all these guys were into, and it's like, okay, well, I want to play like Eric Clapton, and then it's like, well, he listened to Robert Johnson, and then I go and listen to Robert Johnson, and I'm like, oh Jesus Christ, like I don't know how long I can sit here and listen to this guy like high pitch yell.
Mm-hmm.
But the more and more I expose myself to that, and that was like my Neanderthal thinking, like, years and years and years ago,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like now I can pretty much sit down and listen to any piece of music and go, okay, even if I don't personally like it, like I can objectively say, like, I understand why it is the way it is and how it influenced people, and I can appreciate it. It's like I feel like there's almost a wave of closed-mindedness that exists among like most of the musicians that walk the planet today.
Mm-hmm. And it relates back to the whole this even relates back to the whole expanding your horizons or leaving your musical comfort zone, because a lot of people are just stuck in that realm or little bubble of artists and think that, oh, these guys are shaping my sound and that's it. That should never be the case, and that was never the case with
Mm.
these artists either. Like even during their career, they still had other musicians and other bands influencing them. Like say uh, I think me, you, and Boogie were talking about this the other day. The Police, the band The Police, during their last album, which was a Synchronicity, right?
Mhm.
Their
Uh,
last album,
yeah. It was synchronicity.
yeah, their last album ended up being their last album really shaped the next few Rush albums. Like say Grace Under Pressure. That if you ever listen to that album, a song, for example, Distant Early Warning, the guitars had like a really strong reggae sound. And even before that, like say if you want to go back to Permanent Waves, there was a strong reggae sound, which was brought on by the Police, because besides there weren't many big reggae bands out there that were bringing their music to commercial fame in the 80s, besides UB40 and Bob Marley and the Wailers, which I think they broke up in 81 after Bob Marley died.
Yeah.
But I think they all relate to, it's all, whenever genres, believe it or not, a lot of newer genres exist to keep those other genres that aren't related to these newer genres. They're supposed to keep those other genres' legacies alive.
Mm.
And I think that's the whole idea with genres that relate to each other. Before we get on to any other thoughts, I wanted to show a little bit of this one video of Paul Gilbert and Marty Friedman performing, or not performing, but they're like on this Japanese game show, and they're like playing different songs, and they're trying to like figure out the alphabet. It's like they pick a letter from the alphabet, and they have to play like a riff to a song or by an artist, and it's pretty interesting.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let's give it a go. See what's in store, yeah?
Yeah, let me see.
今日は出番がないかと思ってドキドキしたところだよ。
I'm not gonna play the whole video, but
スーパーギタリストの最終決戦
I'll
は
show just
アメリカンスタイルで
a couple of
決着をつけましょう。プレイボール！ギターのメジャーリーガーが激突。ロック A to Z。ギターの最終決戦。
As I said before, Marty Friedman was one of the original guitarists from Megadeth. He played in Megadeth from 2008 to 1988 until 2002.
Yeah.
And Paul Gilbert played in Mr. Big. That's how most people know him. He also played in Racer X, but a lot of people now, like, say in this day and age, would know him for playing
Mr.
in
Big.
Mr. Big. Yeah.
Yeah. I like this guy's shirt, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Alice
セット
Cooper
で勝負をつけてもらいましょう。
はい、藤山メジャーリーグのアンパイアはロック忍者よりまささんです。
よろしくお願いします。ロック一級入魂。拙者がルールブックだ。
藤山ボックスの中に
Japanese.
アルファベットが書かれたボールが26個入っています。そこからシェリーが選んだボールの文字で始まるロックアーティストの曲をギターで答えてください。
そして見事勝利を果たしたギターヒーローにはまたまたニューアルバムの PV を流せる権利を差し上げます。
頑張ってください。
プレイボール
What does Marty Friedman have? A Paul Reed Smith?
I did not get a good look at it.
Well, when it shows, I'll pause it again.
All right.
はい。ポルさん、ディオ。
I'm pretty sure that's an Ibanez. I'm pretty sure I saw it on the headstock.
Yeah, I think it is an Ibanez. A lot of the shred guitarists either play a Strat, a Les Paul, or an Ibanez. Can we also talk about Paul Gilbert's guitar? It looks really sick.
I wonder if those are genuine F-holes or they're just decals.
I'm not sure.
I
to be
can't
honest.
tell. They look fake, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
じゃじゃん。さあ、入ってもらいますが、スタンドプッシャー。
Yeah, those are decals.
Oh, decals.
はい。燃えろ。いいスタートですね。
Let's see what Marty Friedman has.
G!
はい、マーティ。
Green Day.
Let's keep it a buck. Would you have expected him to play Green Day?
No. Green Day.
You get it.
Oh, he gets a point.
You got it! じゃあちなみにポールさんだったら G なんて答えますか？
Gary Moore.
よく知ってるね。さあ、それどんどん参りましょう。シリさんお願いします。
You!
You! お、マッチさん。
U2 でしょう。
お、これしかない。
Again, I would not have expected him to play U2 because this is U2 is definitely very different from either of these guys playing, and I mean it's cool that they know these songs. I think it's really cool, but that's just kind of to show like the type of music that they play on this. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I'm genuinely wondering what they're gonna pick for W. What starts with W? What's some bands?
W.
Or some people?
Every time I get like a letter, I know that there is a band that starts with W, but whenever they say like, hey, pick a letter, pick a band that starts with a certain letter, like say the letter P, I'll immediately have a brain fart and not think about it, and I could just say, oh, Pantera, oh, Pink Floyd.
How often does this happen to you?
Pretty often.
How often does somebody come up to you and say, pick a letter for a band?
No, or at least on social media, it says I see posts like that pretty often on social media. It's like, oh, this letter, if this letter, you got to look at your music and find a band that starts with this letter and then start listening to them, like that kind of thing. Let's see what they got for W.
Oi, ポールさん。
Wasp.
Wasp. White Snake as well. My buddy Chris loves Wasp. Bitchin' Chris. That's what he goes by.
Nirvana でしょう。
Again. And grunge was the big rival against glam metal because it was like a whole big reset with that playing style. It's like, oh, you're gonna play blues, well I'm gonna play glam metal. Oh, you're gonna play glam metal, or I'm gonna play grunge. You're gonna play grunge, well I'm gonna go back to punk music. I'm gonna go to hardcore punk. I'm gonna go to pop punk. It's like ever changing. But that I just wanted to say that before we continue. Was there something you wanted to say to that?
I think genuinely I'd be more inclined to grunge than glam metal just by sheer volume of the balls on some of those grunge artists.
Yeah.
Not Nirvana though. I'm not really a Nirvana guy.
Neither am I, to be honest. I don't hate Nirvana. It's just I couldn't get into their music.
Yeah, Like I get the mystique, but it's like,
Yeah. I can respect them as musicians and artists and all of that stuff, and songwriters too, but it's just not my cup of tea. And I know Alice in Chains sounds very similar. Well, kind of similar, kind of different. There's definitely some notable differences in Alice in Chains, but I've been more into Alice in Chains than I have with Nirvana.
Oh God, I dig Alice in Chains. I really like them.
Yeah, I think they're top-notch songwriters. Like, and the way that they handle like performance and like production, both production, performance, and arrangement with like songwriting and all that, it's just unbelievable. Let's see what other songs they got.
Z!
Hi, ポールさん。
Zebra.
They're a glam metal band too, right? Or they're a punk band.
あるもんだね。
I don't think I've ever even heard of Zebra.
I've heard of them, but I'm not familiar with their music.
C! ちょっとマーティ
I'm
の
gonna
方が
like
早い。
this one,
The
Mason.
Cars. Metal.
なるほどね。
なるほどね。
I knew that you would have enjoyed that. As soon as you
That,
said that.
Superb album. Absolutely superb album.
Is that from their first album, or is that from?
Their first.
That's from their first. Their first album's good. I will admit that.
Oh,
Their first album is
their first album is one of the few albums that I like. I wouldn't skip a single song. You know, like I could just listen all the way through and be happy. Their second one was and then it was like okay, and then everything after that was bleh.
That's how I feel about Bad Company. Like their first two albums were good, and then like I don't know, I couldn't get into their other albums. And this is coming from someone who has like the utmost respect for Paul Rodgers. Like I love his voice, and I think he's one of the best like rock vocalists out there, or one of the best vocalists of all time, I could honestly say. But I don't know, with Bad Company, like there's only a handful of material of them that I like. Like their first two albums, like Bad Company and Straight Shooter, like those two albums are great. But...
Free, right? The with Paul Rodgers.
Mm-hmm. Paul Rodgers, Paul Kosif. Yeah, Kosif.
Kosif. And who was the bass
Kosif.
player? Andy Frazier.
Andy Frazier. Oh,
and Simon Kirk.
Simon Kirk, yes.
Right. Fire and Water. That album is another one where I can just listen all the way through. It's just very, you know. It's like
same.
I feel all happy.
That is by far my all-time favorite. That's by far my favorite album by Free, Fire and Water. Like production and performance is just that it could not be more perfect. Both production and performance. Like you could hear the guitar. Like every single instrument complements each other. The performances, one performance isn't like one musician is not outshining the other, and is not outshining the other. Like it's perfect harmony and perfect chemistry. Like that's like you could not ask for that in a band. And I think Free, and I love Free. Like I think Free is a great band. I've actually started to listen to them more, and I will plan to talk about them one of these days because they're getting me out of my Chicago listening binge.
Ah, yes. Oh god, in middle school I like binged to that album like for like a whole summer. I think every single night I had that album on. It's like ingrained in my memory.
When I was what do you call it? When I was, I think it was when summer was ending, last summer was ending, like 2020 was going into fall. Fire and Water, I would not stop listening to that whole album. Like I you could pick any song from that album, like play any single song from that album, like say the title track or Don't Say You Love Me or Mr. Big, the song that actually inspired the band Mr. Big. That's actually where they got their name, from the Free song Mr. Big. And I think they have a cover of that song off their album Bump Ahead, which is another album that I could listen to without like all the way through without skipping.
Oh, what's that song on Fire and Water? It's like I'll take my seat on the train. Something. It's real sad.
Is it
Crap.
Oh, I Wept?
Oh, I Wept. Yes.
That is another magnificent tune.
I don't know why, but that song in particular is ingrained in my head.
the one song that's ingrained in my head is either "All Right Now," which is the
No.
song that Free is known for, or Fire, or the title track. I love that ding 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 ding, like that
Yeah.
part of the song. And believe it or not, would you have expected? Would people, when listening to Mr. Big, would you have expected Free to be like related to it in any way, shape, form? And let's not even think about Andy Frazier's solo on Mr. Big, even though we really like to, because I every time I hear Mr. Big, as soon as the bass solo comes on, if I'm like driving, I turn that bitch up. Like a like that solo is just like a whole different experience when you're hearing it, like, and you're like just vibing and driving and like, or anything, like you're just vibing to it. It's just so beautiful.
There's this one lick.
Feeling.
There's this one lick that he does in there that I really like, where he's all the way at the top frets and he's like do 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 do. God, it's funky. I love it.
Oh man, that I could go on for hours talking about Mr. Big.
Yeah,
Free. That song is just
make an episode purely dedicated to the bass solo from Mr. Big.
I could. But,
yeah. I check back at your channel the next day, and there's like a 6-hour long stream.
Oh God. Oh, it's
gotta happen.
It's just absolute, like, I could tell you when I first listened to Mr. Big before I listened to Free, like I listened to the band Mr. Big, and I would not have guessed that they were that Free had any influence towards Mr. Big. And
not at all.
They're both a 4-piece band, like have guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. And both of those bands do, Free and Mr. Big. I could tell you, I did not, and I'm sure you probably didn't either. Like you said, like I would not have guessed that, because when you think of Mr. Big, you think of shredding, like you think of the guitar, like the guitarist and the bassist showing off, and like being like, you know, one of the last like glam metal bands out there before it started, you know, fading from popularity. Because around the late 80s, early 90s, that's when glam metal started to, you know, the glam metal's popularity started to die down from the mainstream media. Before we continue, before we go off on more stuff about Free and all this other stuff, I want to see what other songs they have. I find that cool that Marty Friedman can speak Japanese.
Okay, now I'm ready. Ozubone.
Yeah, of course.
I remember, I'm trying to remember. Still Wait the Night. I think it's from Blizzard of Oz, if I'm not mistaken. Let's look that up.
That would be my guess. I haven't listened to too much 80s Osbourne.
Yeah, it's from Blizzard of Oz. Red City's Blues. Let's see, Greg, man, behind the mic. How are you, man? We're just talking about genres of music that you wouldn't expect to be related to each other, but are. Another fine example, Randy Rhodes. If you really want some like blues oriented shredding, Randy Rhodes. I don't know if I don't know how well versed you or how well you know Randy Rhodes, but he is, I could honestly say he's one of the greatest guitarists that's ever lived.
Oh
Like,
yeah, just
there's no
by sheer
denying he has
classical influence alone.
Yeah, and I didn't even know that. I didn't even know he was classically influenced. That's something I learned. Yeah, like, and you could tell that man had feel. He had feel to his playing.
I remember, God, as far when I first picked up the guitar, or even like considered taking it even remotely seriously, the first person that I was genuinely enthralled with was Randy Rhodes. And I remember, and this was back in my like 6th grade year, I think, like the summer of my 6th grade year, like, yeah, just going right into the summer. I remember I had finally decided to start taking guitar seriously to some extent, you know, as much as I could at the time. And good Lord, I remember like looking at all those, especially live tapings of Randy Rhodes playing live. And he was like the first person that I looked at and went, holy crap, I should just give up now. Like, yeah,
Oh man,
you know, like,
that's actually how I felt when I picked up the bass and I first learned of two bass players, Stuart Hamm and Billy Sheehan. Those two players.
gee, yeah, that's a good place to start.
Surprisingly enough,
Yikes.
this wasn't where I started, but when I saw them play, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't just be playing the bass. Because of just like their technique and their abilities. Like, have you seen that famous bass solo that Stuart Hamm did? I think it was at a Joe Satriani show in 1988. I think it was. Yeah, it was like a Joe Satriani.
No, I have
show.
not.
On YouTube, it's titled "The Greatest Bass Solo Ever." I'm gonna play a little bit of it because
Actually, I tell you, the first bass player that I was like genuinely enthralled with was Victor Wooten. That guy.
Oh, he was another. I actually, when I was still trying to learn how to slap, I was thinking like I was never gonna be able to do this. So like, because I heard when I first, actually, believe it or not, when I first got into like wanting to learn slap and like slap with the bass, I was hearing Flea, and this could also relate to, you know, the genres that are related to each other. When I heard Flea play, I was like, I can't do this. But I was sorry to cut you off if you were saying anything.
Nah, man. I mean, it's just like, I mean, come on. I've definitely been there, you know, like Randy Rhodes. I think the only other time that I've gone like, oh God, I just got to give up was actually after I met you guys, and I went to go see Robin Trower live at the Wellmont Theater. I think it was in 2019. Had to be 2019. And oh God, I went there to see him. And like, you know, you hear his lead playing on the records and everything. And it's like, all right, that's pretty good. You know, it's like Bridge of Sighs is kind of like uniquely its own thing, where it's like, I don't think I would hear that type of lead playing or even rhythm playing like anywhere else. But like seeing the guy live, especially he did Daydream live, which is like, I guess, his magnum opus as a show closer. And he just went on for like 10 or 12 minutes, just like shredding it. Like, and I don't know if it was something with the acoustics in the room, but there were certain notes when he would hit and it would just like resonate up your spine and give you chills. And I remember I walked out of the theater that night and I was like, either I start practicing 10 hours a day or I give up. And that's from somebody who's just like, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Last thing I'll say on this, and that's somebody who's like almost kind of obscure, you know, like you would expect that from like some bigger guitarists or whatever, but this guy is more obscure, right? He was just kind of localized in his little 70s click, and then he kind of faded, right?
Yeah.
But even still, in when this was 2019, going to see him play, it's like I was not expecting that. I was not expecting to walk out of the theater that night with my jaw dropped going, holy crap, I gotta give up.
That even reminds me, when I saw Iron Maiden for the very first time, which was also in 2019, I could tell you right off the bat, this is just my opinion, seeing Adrian Smith solo live, I say he's the best guitarist in Iron Maiden.
Mm.
And you could see all the genres that are connected with him, but it's his own genre. But like you hear the blues influence, the heavy metal, the glam metal influence, the metal influence from back in the day, the progressive rock influence. It's like all these genres that I didn't even know that influenced Iron Maiden. Were all into his playing, and I just see him playing, and I'm just like I was never bored during that concert. That's all you have to know. Like whenever I see whatever the solos would go to Adrian, and he's like starts with the solo, like in the middle of it, my whole face is like throughout the whole time. Like I'm like how can anyone play like that? How? And believe it or not, a lot of people get this good when it comes to other genres, when they credit those other genres, like and not to toot my own horn, but when I first picked up the bass, I was only bit into metal and like classic rock, mostly heavy metal music, because I like Iron Maiden was like that band that really like was like, yeah, maybe I'll start getting into music. And I was like, do I want to start guitar, or do I want to play bass? And I started playing the bass, and I'm like, oh, this feels good. I actually like how that feels, like, because the fingers, and like, because I don't want to feel the need to play with a pick and always have to worry about whether or not I have a pick. When I know there are bass players out there that play with a pick, but I like that finger style, and I saw the way that Steve Harris played the bass, and I'm like, I really dig this, and that's how it went from there. But I noticed that I was just stuck. I was stuck in this kind of second gear when it came to that, and I like looked back, and I'm like, oh, here's some other artists. Here's some other, like, I've listened to Rush, and I'm like, wow, he's good. He's good. He could also sing and play, and that's like, you know what? That's a cool idea. And I look up Rush, I look up Geddy Lee, and I'm like, he influenced Steve Harris from Iron Maiden. He influenced Cliff Burton from Metallica, who I really liked at the time too. And he influenced a bunch of other bassists that came after him. And I looked at other bands that influenced him. I looked at John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin. I looked at John Entwistle from The Who. I went back and forth. I'm like, there's so much connection with these bassists. Like there's like, it's a whole lineage. It's like a family tree almost. And it's like, wow, like if I look into these other bass players, like this, like I incorporated that into my playing and see what styles and techniques they're doing. And I'm like, wow, this is like, I've noticed like a big improvement. And this is actually how you see your growth as a musician and as a bass player. Like, I started to get out of my comfort zone, which was heavy metal and hard rock and classic rock, like from The Who and Led Zeppelin. And I was like, you know what? My mom's big into these artists like Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye. And I learn about Nathan Watts, James Jamerson, and I'm even Louis Johnson. He played on Thriller and Off the Wall. Michael Jackson's his first two successful solo albums. Well, Thriller was the best-selling album of all time. That's his most successful solo album. But Louis Johnson, I saw how he played, and I incorporated that. I was like, I like how he plays. I can figure out a way to make that me. And and I want to keep that spirit alive. Same thing with Nathan Watts, Stevie Wonder's bassist. He played on Songs in the Key of Life. I saw how he played. It was very funky. It had jazz. It had R&B. It had like soul. There was a lot of soul into his playing, and I incorporated that into my playing. And I'm like, I really like how he sounds. And I'm like, and then when I started playing with you guys, I was like, okay, I've listened to all these artists. I've listened to all these genres of music. Now, how am I going to make that my playing? How is this
Right.
supposed to be a part of me? Like, I can relate all these genres together, but it's up to me now on how I want to keep this legacy alive.
Mm.
And again, I'm not purposely trying to toot my own horn. I just want to demonstrate. I just want to demonstrate, you know, what these artists mean to me and what these genres of music, how they affected my playing.
No, of course. I mean, that's for everybody, man. I mean, you gotta. I think it's important to. I mean, it's important to wear your influences somewhere, somehow, somewhat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
It'll affect, and believe it or not, as much as people don't want to have influences, it's more a subconscious thing.
right.
It's more of a subconscious thing, and people don't realize, like, yeah, you might end up liking this artist, but you wouldn't classify them as an influence. You'll learn, but believe it or not, people will take to consideration how certain other artists sound. Like whenever we play our own music live, a lot of people say that, you know, they could hear Black Sabbath in our music. They could hear Elton John in our music. They could hear all sorts of other artists that I like that I wouldn't have even expected to count as an influence. And they would say, like, "Oh, this is it sounds like this," and I'm like, "Wow, I actually like these artists." And it's like, "Oh, it sounds like this." I'm like, "Are you familiar with this guy?" And so forth. And I'm sure the same thing. Obviously, I know I'm taking up a lot of I'm using a lot of examples in my own thing, but I'm sure I know that you have a lot of instances where people are like, "Oh, this sounds like Cream. This sounds like you sound like Tony Iommi. You sound like this. You sound like that." Like, I could definitely hear that. And when I've showed people
The SG helps.
Yeah, the SG is a big help with that. And what is it?
I think I think it even reflects off of what kind of instrument you're playing. Like, my playing has changed dramatically since I've started maining an LP. I mean, I'm not playing quite the same way or style. I think it's funny how the way in which you may present something can be changed even by a simple change instrument. You know, like, I'm not picking up my SG as much anymore. I'm mostly picking up an LP. And now I've noticed that it's almost as if I'm not playing as heavy anymore. I've got a lighter touch, you know? It's almost as if I'm playing a little smoother, a little bit more, I think a good example would be, I feel like I'm trying to. Hello. I feel like I'm trying to fill less space, if that makes sense. Which actually it does make sense, because like an SG isn't really known for its sustain. An LP definitely is. So it's like, now that I have an instrument that is capable of more sustain, I want to hold notes more. I want to play a little smoother. I want to feel the note more almost. Whereas you're limited to that in a sense on an SG. So for my piece on that, I think it's very interesting that even a slight change in your instrument can really affect the way in which you present your feel, so to speak. I think that's interesting as hell.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I spent my time in the UK, while I was spending my time in the UK, I brought my Yamaha bass, not my beloved not my beloved Dimension bass, which I actually
You had to
originally
have
got.
missed that thing. Come on.
Yeah, I did. Because this is my baby. This is like my number one. But when I played my Yamaha bass, it had a more like old fashioned low end, like something that you hear in an Epiphone Rivale or Gibson EB3, like that kind of uh, old fashioned vintage low end. And I was playing a
Right.
lot of bluesier stuff and a lot of like I was playing a lot of bluesier type of kind of music. And what also contributed to that was I was playing with some blues guitarists. I was playing with I was doing a lot of old fashioned styles, especially with whenever I was playing with other artists, whenever I was playing with other musicians from the UK. I was doing all different things, like my boy Tommy, he was a very blues, like he's very open-minded guitarist, he plays a lot of different genres, but he's strictly the blues. And we started a blues trio with my other friend Jesus. And I noticed my playing was very different from, say, whenever I play back home with you guys. Like we have our own style here, and I had my own style when I was over in the UK, and it was very contrasting. But I'm me, and I was just in two different bands. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes it more easily able to understand why musicians can switch course. Like, I mean, hell, look at Eric Clapton. Okay, jamming with these two jazz musicians in freaking England, playing Marshall Stacks in a SG, right? But then, oh wait a minute, he moved to America and he picked up a Strat. And oh my God, have you ever seen that video of him playing with Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins? And this dude is literally playing like good old down home iced tea drinking country licks. And it's like, you cannot possibly be the same guy who picked up an SG and plugged it through a freaking Marshall full stack. But it's like, it's not hard to understand how somebody can go through a metamorphosis like that, like things change, time changes, people evolve, people pick up new instruments even. And it's like, again, when something is even as small as playing a Les Paul can like completely like revitalize the way that I think of my playing. Yeah, moving to a different country could definitely do that. So, like,
I completely agree with you. I could not have said that any better myself. Were you going to say something else?
No, that's about my piece.
But to piggyback off of that, I think that's another big part of genres that are more related than you think, because you look at artists, say, from the 60s, like from one decade, like the beginning of their career. Like another example is Genesis, the band Genesis. When they started out, like in the late 60s and early 70s, they were a progressive rock band, and people only knew them for that. They were up there with the other prog rock greats like Yes, King Crimson, Jethro Tull. They had a similar style to that, but after Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett left, they started having a more like pop oriented kind of sound, and it was more commercially successful, and it was a huge contrasting sound. It was a huge difference of sound from the beginning of their career, because they just had Phil Collins, Mike Rutherford, and Tony Banks. And yeah, they had other musicians that helped them live, but it was mostly just those three that did the major switch from prog rock to pop rock. And I could honestly say, listen to Selling England by the Pound and then go listen to Invisible Touch. the two of those neither of those albums even sound remotely similar. Or better yet, listen to
Lou, I think we're losing you. Okay. Well, it's just me.
Clapton, Phil Collins took over as a vocalist. Doesn't sound anything like The Invisible Touch. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now you're a little better now.
All right. If anything happens, I'll just restart the Wi-Fi and then we'll wrap things up. But as I was saying before, there's a huge difference of sound, but it's the exact same people, the exact same band. Hell, look at Linkin Park, for example. Oh, can you hear me? Bear with me for a second.
Aha. Well, it seems our buddy Lou has gone to the nether regions of the internet. So I'm going to keep you gentlemen entertained any way possible. So I think a good place to piggyback off of what he was saying is that
all right, sorry about that.
Oh, he's back.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, way better.
Okay. But as I was saying, it's like it's not just the influences that affect the bands, it's also the change of sound within the bands. Like Linkin Park, for example, each record sounds different from the last. And it's because of the different genres of music that they tackle. Even bands that are known for their signature rock sound or signature sound don't sound the same. Led Zeppelin's first 4 albums, none of them sound, or actually all of Led Zeppelin's discography, but let's just say the first 4 albums, none of them sound remotely like each other. The first album, strictly blues and folk blues influence, strictly that, because a good portion of that is covers and another good portion is just them showing off their stuff, showing off their influences, wearing them proud, because they were a blues oriented band. Led Zeppelin 2, doing more hard rock, trying to be more do more commercially successful like hard rock or more radio rock oriented, and just kind of testing the waters when it comes to their music. Like they had a Whole Lot of Love. It was that signature hard rock sound of theirs. It was old blues, old fashioned. It still had the blues sound to it. Ramble On, it still had a folk sound to it, but it was starting to be more of like mixed with the hard rock, their signature hard rock sound. And then all of a sudden, they went to 3, Led Zeppelin 3. They did more folk, like just strictly folk. They did a couple of things here and there. They did some hard rock, like Immigrant Song, Out on the Tiles. They even did a blues song, the famous blues song, Since I've Been Loving You. And that was also like a big instance on John Paul Jones on the keys or on the organ. And it was different from Zeppelin 2. Say Zeppelin 2 was more on, how can they make their music sound like them? And then 3 was like, let's try different genres and see how we sound, see how it fits us. And then Zeppelin 4, that was when they truly shaped their sound, their definitive sound. And they had like Led Zeppelin 4 was that album where it's like, okay, this is Led Zeppelin. This is what Led Zeppelin sounds like. And it's like, it's hard to mistake them for that, because there's Black Dog, there's Rock and Roll, there's, hell, the entire rest of the album. There's Stairway to Heaven, most notably on Led Zeppelin 4, and so forth. But that's just another example of, genres being more related, of the genres, the contrasting genres strengthening the sound of one band. Do you have any other examples before we get to the final thoughts?
I'd say probably the one is just like the Beatles. Like, I mean, come on. I mean, okay, granted that was probably mostly because of drugs, but like, look at look at the first couple albums. Okay, Business Suits, very high and proper.
The Good Boys.
And then freaking Sergeant Pepper's. Okay. And then even after Sergeant Pepper's, I mean, just freaking Abbey Road. I mean, and they all look like disheveled, hippie, homeless. I mean,
like they're getting ready for the 70s.
Yeah, I love the transition, but that's really the only one that comes to mind right now.
Honestly, that's a great example because to piggyback from what you were saying, they went off and like they were first known as the Good Boys, while the Rolling Stones were known as the Bad Boys of the 60s. Like they were like, yeah, good times. Like the Beatles were like, yeah, we're the good boys. We're really goody two shoes, really nice people. We're talking about how we love girls, how we love a girl, how we're in love, and all this other stuff. Just all the good times and all that other stuff. Like from the Beatlemania era, which was like the early 60s until 1966. That's when Revolver happened, we're like, okay, let's talk about some serious issues. Let's talk about some serious topics that we never talked about in our songs. And let's experiment in the studio. And they were like, oh, and when they were finished with Revolver, they're like, okay, how much further can we go with this? Let's change our identity and let's actually sound different, both not just vocally, but in our music. And bam, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And there was a lot of experimentation, not just with the sounds, but with, arrangement, with their music. And they also realized, hey, we have to stop touring and performing live because we can't perform our music that is in this arrangement live, which makes sense because, there was a lot of big arrangements in their sound. And then 1968, the one overlooked album that I think is starting to get credit now, the White Album. And that was kind of like the peak, I would say the peak of their experimentation with their music and their sounds, because you had While My Guitar Gently Weeps, because you had the piano, and you had Eric Clapton playing on the song. Most people knew Eric Clapton from the Yardbirds or I'm again drawing a blank with that. Yeah, you knew him for that because that was when he started his career.
Oh, and I think by that point, 1968, so that would have been the end of Cream. So Cream.
Yeah, Cream. How could I forget Cream? I'm thinking like, what was Cream's span? It was 66 to 68, right?
In 66, and then November of 68, I think they played their last show.
Huh. I think that's when my mom was born. November. Yeah, that was around the time my mom was born. November 68.
She missed out, man.
Missed out on a good era. And then you have Abbey Road, where it's like, okay, let's make sure that this next record is experimental, but it's our music. This is like us performing and us only. And Abbey Road comes along, and you got Come Together. That was actually the first Beatles bass line that I've learned. That was the first Beatles bass line I learned. And you have Something, the famous George Harrison contribution.
Oh. Beautiful
love
song.
That song. It is a beautiful song. I love that song. What's another one? Maxwell's Silver Hammer. I think it was Paul was on the keys and singing. It's actually a pretty dark song too when you think about it, because it's literally about a guy who has a hammer and he's killing people with it. That's actually what the song is about. He's taking a hammer and hitting people in the head and killing them. That's for a song in 1969 that came out in 1969. That's pretty morbid when you think about it, because it's like, yeah, it's gonna sound all nice and like cute and artsy and all that. The bang bang Maxwell silver hammer came down on her head. Like it's all like nice and like playful, and then you look at the lyrics and it's pretty dark. And then
I gotta be honest, my favorite. I know it's like a meme, but it's got to be Her Majesty.
Her Majesty's a pretty nice girl.
Pretty
but she
nice
doesn't
girl,
have
but she
lot
hasn't
to
got a
say.
lot to say. Boom, 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 boom,
I
boom.
like that song.
Come on. Wait, no.
And you got, before I get into the rock opera, you have the song "I Want You." The "I Want You."
Oh God, I love that. It's one of
I
my
love that
favorites.
song. Same. I love the bass line on that song because it's like, how can a bass line be so simplistic and so complex at the same time? Like, it's like the Beatles said, let's take the full extent of our blues influence and put that on a song while we have our old-fashioned Beatles sound to it as well. It's like they took those genres and put it into this whole new kind of formula. And that was what made that song. The other George Harrison contribution, "Here Comes the Sun," that was another one, and that experimented with a lot of this. I think George Harrison, was, if Paul is my first favorite Beatle, but the one that comes second is definitely George. I would say George definitely comes second when it comes to my favorite Beatles. But
On its last.
is that, or I don't know if I want to put Ringo in last.
No, Ringo's up there. Ringo's up there.
Ringo. And believe it or not, when you saw it, and this could even be said, Ringo was learning the drums while he was in the Beatles, and it really showed on this record, and it showed like how the music affected him. And believe it or not, this kind of style influenced other drummers too, like Keith Moon from The Who, Dave Grohl from Nirvana, the Foo Fighters, and them Crooked Vultures.
Oh God, them Crooked Vultures! I love that.
I gotta listen.
Love that
Isn't John
band.
Paul Jones in that band?
Yeah, it's John Paul Jones, Dave Grohl, and Josh Homme from that band.
Is it Stone Temple Pilots? No.
No, not Stone Temple Pilots. It's
I'm thinking of
that other
someone
cool
else.
one.
But
Whatever.
I know.
But really
we were gonna-
good. I love that whole album.
With that small rock opera that I was going to talk about with Abbey Road, you could definitely hear a lot of different genres affect how it sounds. Like there was the blues. You know what? I'm even going to look. Let's go on Wikipedia. I know it's probably a cheat code for music.
Ha.
Let's go on Wikipedia.
Yeah, well, half the crap that I know is because of Wikipedia, if I'm being completely honest. Maybe a few obscure books, like a couple autobiographies I've read, but mostly Wikipedia.
Yeah, I'm like that too, to be honest. I'm gonna keep it a buck, but and a couple interviews, like obviously interviews with these musicians and hearing them speak. That's weird. I thought they had. Let me see. I thought they had the Power Pop, no matter what. Oh no, it's a Bad Finger. I'm trying to look for. Let's see. This is the B side of Abbey Road. Okay. Weird.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
the whole second song, the whole second side was like that was like a Paul's Baby, right?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that had classical influence, jazz influence, blues influence, and all that could. That's just another fine example, and this goes on with the Beatles. This with their whole repertoire, it's kind of like, how many genres can we take and incorporate into our music, and how could we make it our sound as well? But let's get on to final thoughts because I know you and I both have to call in a night.
Mm.
But what are your final thoughts on this whole genre idea? Because I know we've been going off on tangents for the past hour and a half.
I mean, again, just there's stuff that you would never suspect, and you got to keep your ear open for it. And it's same thing with influences and so on and so forth. Just keep your ear open and constantly learn more, make yourself a better musician and a better listener. And I say that pretty much sums up a nice and concise everything that I've been hammering at the whole stream.
Yeah. Another thing, I couldn't have said that better myself, but another thing that people should also take to account are the changes within a band or artist's sound, because that's truly how you can see different genres affecting the artists and affecting the band overall. Like Stevie Wonder, I promise you this is my last comparison, but this kind of fits with the final thought and all that. When Motown kind of gave him more free creativity, he said, what can I do with these influences, and what can I do with these influences that I have currently, and what can I do with the sound that I had in the 60s and early 70s, and how could I turn that into my solo albums? And each record had different ideas. Music of My Mind was where he's like, I'm going to play every instrument on the album, or almost every instrument on the album, and I'm gonna talk about themes of love, themes of loss, themes of relationships, themes of like different, mostly love. And then the next album was more about spiritualism and ideas of like more ideas of love, more ideas of bad luck affecting people, more ideas of the government, how the government affects people, and then bam, inner visions, social issues, the idea of reincarnation, more spiritual thinking. And it continues on with fulfilling this first finale, but with different instruments, different styles, and then the magnum opus of everything that led up to that moment, Songs in the Key of Life, one of the most beautiful albums that have ever been released, not just in the 1970s, but of all time. And when you really mix those genres together, you get Songs in the Key of Life. When you really take to account and listen to, every single type of music that has ever, I'm not saying every single genre of music in the world, because that's a whole, that's more to count, but a lot of the times where your influences and so forth, the more you take to account of that, the more something beautiful can come from it. And I think that's the whole idea. The differences in certain genres end up being more similar than you think. And I think I'll leave it with that, guys. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this stream. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you want to see videos similar to this one. If you want to see updates regarding the podcast, tune into my Instagram at LA Perez Works. On my story, I usually post updates. Next Monday, I will have another stream for you. This next Monday stream will be about underrated bass players, and I'll keep you guys updated on the time, but I'll let you guys know of that. And for anyone who's feeling generous, just check out our Cash App at $Louis ATM 929. If you're feeling generous and you want to contribute to the podcast, just send some stuff over. Obviously, it will come back to whatever I have here, and that's all, and that's again all towards your, whether or not you enjoy the podcast, which I certainly hope you did. But thank you again for helping out Mason with tonight.
Of course,
you're a big help, and that's all I got to say, guys. I hope you have a great weekend, and as always, stay tuned.